Board
This
members
conference will now be recorded.
with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there's generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings. And we have 4 items on the agenda. We have our county manager update, public health update. We have the Columbia Pacific Economic Development District Regional Broadband Plan. So that will be good discussion, as well as the comp plan update, Goaltend housing. We'll go ahead and start with the county manager update, and I'll turn it over to Don Boone.
Thank you, Chair Quayle, members of the board. Good morning. Just want to remind the board that on Monday we'll be having a special meeting for strategic planning, and it will be an in-person meeting. At least that's the plan. Terry Moore will be here from PSU personally, and we've structured it so that there's opportunity and exercises for collaboration between board members and to have plenty of conversation. So our goal is to get through that work session and have a pretty clear sense of what your board's priorities are going into next year. And then the staff will take that, put it into a draft strategic plan update, and then bring that back to your board for your consideration and approval. So obviously the budget calendar is moving forward. So having this information will be seminal for us, making sure that the budget reflects those priorities. So the other is that, as you know, the governor has decided to rescind the mask mandate effective really on March 12th. And so the county is working through some signage changes for our facilities. We want to be mask welcoming for those who choose to continue to wear masks. There'll be a couple parts of our organization, both in public health and in the jail, that will continue to require masking. But for the rest, it'll be mask optional. And so as part of that, we will start talking to your board about moving into some form of a hybrid board meeting option. But we will talk to you and find out what works for you in that manner. So it gives us an opportunity to hit that more normal button, whatever that might mean. So look forward to those conversations. It's been 2 years coming, and I know that everybody's pretty relieved. I will make another note real quick that the emergency order that the governor also approved a couple years ago is also going to be rescinded or sunset as of April 1st. And so the county mirrored our emergency order with the governor, so ours also will sunset April 1st. So that'll be the first time in over 2 years that we haven't been under an emergency declaration. So, and that's all I have, Chair Quayle.
Thank you, County Manager. Any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. We'll go ahead and move on to our public health update. And Margot, our County Health Director, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I think I have 10 minutes on the agenda, and I imagine you may have some questions. But since it's been a little while and we're going through another transition in the pandemic, I thought it would just be a good idea to provide you with a little bit of data on the front end, and then let you know where we are with operations and expected changes in guidance as I speak. There's another press conference with OHA and ODE at 11:30 today. So when we look at some of the data, I'm going to start with our vaccination rates in 18 and older. We have 83% of our population have received a first dose, number 6th in the state. 75% have completed a primary series, which is also great, but we want those boosters, and 42% have been boosted. What I'm seeing in the data across the board is that, of course, you would like the boosters to be closer to the percentage of those receiving the primary series, but when we look at the demographics, there's some variables that would contribute to that difference. What we do know is that people are continuing to get vaccinated at a slower rate. Some are still getting their primary dose, not many, but we are seeing more and more people getting their booster dose in our walk-in clinics here at the health department and our outreach clinics. In the 5 to 11-year-olds, 23% have completed their primary series. Now remember, they started vaccinating much later on. The goal federally, nationally, and at the state was hoping to about 30% of the population. So we're still not there yet. And I don't know that we'll get there, but we are continuing to make vaccine available. And in the 12 to 17-year-olds, 50% have completed their primary series. Right now, the 7-day running average is about 12 booster doses per day in our county and 4 first doses. So a very different place now than where we were when we started the vaccination campaign. When we look at the week of February 20th, and we look at community transmission across the state, all counties are high, but three are in the substantial transmission, and one of those is Clatsop County. So we're no longer high. And there's 2 categories, substantial and high transmission rates, and it's based upon positivity. So when we look at the positivity and we look at it from a cumulative perspective, it's about 9% for our county overall. We remember going up and then it coming back down again. Right now, we're at about 3%. Last week is 7.8%. So what we're seeing is that actually very rapid decline in cases throughout the county and throughout the state. When we look at our pediatric cases, and this is a focus because of changes coming in education, we have about 7,500 basically 0 to 17-year-olds in our county. And about 785 of those pediatric, those in that pediatric age group have been positive. So it's about a 10% positivity rate. What we know when we look at the data and dashboards, and this is really important for you to remember, is that the access to self-testing has increased considerably. And in addition to that, individuals are no longer required to report their test results. So the data that we're seeing in the dashboard is coming from those of us, and there are many of us, who are testing and are reporting it, are required to report through our various reporting mechanisms. And for us, it's through OPERA. When we look at our overall COVID operations right now, the PIC is still operating 5 days a week. It will continue to operate 5 days a week. But if the last time I spoke with you, we were open and receiving calls from 9 in the morning till 5 in the evening. Call volume has dropped considerably. And part of that has to do with the changes in guidance and requirements to report and an increased understanding of when individuals can and cannot be excluded from the workplace. So our hours now, and have been for the last couple weeks, are 9 to 12. And we continue to staff it with paid staff and volunteers. We can stand up and increase our hours if needed overnight, but right now this is meeting the demand in the community, and we keep very detailed data on all our weekly call volume. Testing as well is still continuing 5 days a week from 9 to 12. And we're starting to look at incorporating travel testing into our operation. We have not been doing that to this point for a few different reasons. One, we had a supply chain issue. Then we had to prioritize populations. And our clinical hospital partners have been able to absorb that travel testing. And for us, because there's no cost to testing, there's been no cost to testing, and there will not be. The tests are no cost at all. There can be an administrative fee that's charged. We have not been charging that throughout this pandemic. We want to make sure that there are no barriers for those who need it. So we will likely move, when we start doing travel testing, incorporating that into the health department, where we're still offering COVID vaccinations 5 days a week on a walk-in basis. In the last couple of weeks, we've given 75 doses of COVID vaccination here on site. And then we continue to do our outreach clinics. We're down in Cannon Beach today. We have a couple clinics scheduled down there, but we're all over the county, 5 and older, any vaccine that individuals want except for J&J. And that's all walk-in as well. So we'll continue doing that. And what we're seeing is this is the demand of the community, is to be able to just have ease of access and walk-in when it's convenient for them. We're still waiting on the pediatric 6-month-old to 5 years of age to be able to vaccinate them. And it looks like that will happen in April. And one thing I just want to make a note of, because there's so many changes in the guidance, even around efficacy, different age groups, and we've heard some changes this week in the news. It's just to remind the public that normally before a vaccine or any medication is authorized by the FDA, there's 5 to 10 years of research, right? All the studies have happened. And in this pandemic, we're doing it all in real time. So we're continually getting new information based on a lot of metadata. And so, so it's not a failure of the system, it's the system doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is using data to inform evidence-based decisions. And lastly, I just want to talk about the schools. It's just amazing, extraordinary what they have been dealing with as they opened back up to in-person education this year. We continue to meet with them weekly. We spent a few weeks looking at data to really understand the impact of lost school days due to quarantine on their populations. And while it was not, a truly scientific analysis, because we were looking at retrospective data, not collecting it in real time and analyzing it, plus there's so many variables to consider, the bottom line is that most of the kids that were in quarantine were not becoming positive. And so we had, when you look at it at a cumulative level, and we weren't even separating it from the 10-day quarantine guidance and the 5-day quarantine guidance, they were missing days and days and days and days and days of in-person learning. And so I'm really grateful for our collaborative working relationship with the superintendents, and our role is not to tell them what to do. They know their schools, their school community best, and we're here to support them and provide them the best guidance. And I believe we've been doing that, and we are in daily communication sometimes depending upon what's going on in their individual district. My sense, and I think we'll hear more today, is that both ODE and OHA want schools to return to as much normalcy as they can. There will still be some level of isolation for someone, a student who or staff who tests positive, but there will be changes likely in the quarantine guidance in the school setting. And when you look at the data, it makes sense. And to remind everyone that there has been communicable disease guidance in the schools for a long time. We have many communicable diseases that can affect the school population. Schools know how to implement that guidance. It's very, very clear. And so I think really the strategy is to recognize that we're at a place now where we can start applying that same framework and guidance to COVID as well. We have to remember that there's the early learning population. We do have students who are not vaccinated, and we also have a population that are not eligible to get vaccinated yet. We need to protect them, as well as students with complex health needs in the school setting. And so our superintendents, again, are surveying their school community, household, students, and staff to determine what's best for their district. And my sense is that it will likely maybe highly recommended or required masking in some settings, but also really just focusing on being masking optional and masking friendly. I know the districts are concerned that for families who want their children to be masked, students who may choose to mask, that we want to make sure that that they do not feel uncomfortable wearing a mask within their peer population. And we're just preparing for spring break. We don't know what it will bring this year and what we might see after spring break. So we're prepared for an increased call volume, likely at the pick, and maybe some higher demand for testing as well. And we received all of our at-home test kits, or almost all of them. And Tiffany and Puka in emergency management have done an excellent job in using the same framework they did for PPE to get those tests to the populations that most need it and are most vulnerable. So that seems to be going well. And so far, we've distributed over 1,000 at-home tests as well. So that's my update. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Margot. I see that Commissioner Thompson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I participate in the community action team, and we get reports from the Head Start programs. And I don't hear you mentioning Head Start, calling it out specifically. Do you coordinate with the Head Start programs as well?
We don't directly, because they get their guidance from Early Learning and Head Start, which is a federal program all the way to the state. If they have cases, they have their own specific guidance they follow. It gets reported to us. We're aware of that, and we support them in consultation. Also in Early Learning, they can order test kits from us, or they can order it directly from OHA, those channels to open up test kits to certain populations, including Clatsop Community Action. They can order their test kits now directly for the populations they serve.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Banks.
Just a quick question regarding testing for travel. Are we going to be adding testing for events to that, or are we just going to stick testing to travel? And then to reiterate, we will continue to offer testing for free. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, there's no cost at all to our testing out at Camp Raylia. As we start eventually to normalize testing down the road, we can and we have been able to charge an administration fee, not for the testing, but an administration fee. We have not, because we've received support to be able to do that through COVID funds. And again, that can become a barrier to populations, and that's not what we want to see. We're here to serve everyone equitably. And as far as event testing, we haven't really talked about event testing, simply because people have access to at-home tests now, and it's not required, right? And I don't even think testing is going to be required for some travel as well in the future. So we're starting with travel, and we may do event testing, but I think it's more of not necessarily separating it out, but just under what circumstances is it best to do preemptive testing.
Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you, Margot, for all you're doing. As this is, a big transition, kind of turning the page into the next phase of this. But I just, again, pass along to the entire department about how much we appreciate what everybody's been doing. And again, thanks again for the guidance to the schools, because I, as a parent, that is something that very interested in, and appreciate that close cooperation with the school districts.
Welcome.
All right. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Columbia Pacific Economic Development District Regional Broadband Plan. It's on page 3 of the packet. And I see we have some guests joining us, and will I turn it over first to our county manager, or who will be leading the discussion today?
Chair Quaylen, members of the board, thank you. I think that we'll just hand it over to Ariane and let her push the topic forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ariane.
Good morning, commissioners. So joined with me today is Dave Stockton and Neil Shaw. They are our consultants on the regional broadband project, and I'm going to turn it over to them in just a minute to talk through some of our findings. But just to let you know, we're going to talk through our high-level findings on the regional broadband, and then Dave and Neil are going to cover broadband funding, which will be coming in significant amounts here soon. They're also going to talk about what trends they're seeing and how other jurisdictions are dealing with some of this funding. And then lastly, we want to just talk through some of the options for Clatsop County and start getting a feel for how Clatsop County might want to proceed on broadband. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Dave Stockton, also with me is
Oh,
Neil Shaw.
Dave, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? How about now?
It's just really low.
Just
the
real
level.
soft.
Okay.
Do I need to share the screen, or do I need to have somebody share a screen? This is Teresa.
No, I don't think
No,
so.
I think we're good, Teresa. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Is my volume okay about now? How's this?
A little better, yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll just try to talk loud. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. Neil and I are with a consulting firm called Uptown Services. We focus on municipal broadband. And so we've been involved with public sector broadband for over 20 years. And, obviously working with Ariane and the team to look at this 4-county project. So we have attached a report. I think given timing here today for this meeting, we don't want to go through all the details there. I think as Ariane suggested, instead we'll just summarize that report. If there's anything you want to discuss in that, we'll take time to go through that. But we want to have time to talk about the grant funding situation and then just have dialogue around what the options are for Clatsop County in taking advantage of this potential opportunity. So why don't I start with kind of a brief summary of what we found and then go into those other topics to talk about grant dollars and kind of the models that we're seeing other counties and entities pursue. So as it relates to the project, basically, here's the approach we took and then kind of, what we found so far. We first identified underserved areas using FCC data. So when we talk about the grant funding, we're going to talk a little bit about underserved areas. And that simply means it's communities or neighborhoods where high capacity broadband is not available. It's limited in speed and capacity, or it's not affordable. But those are the key criteria that typically determine whether or not a particular project is going to be eligible for federal grant dollars. So we use the FCC data. There's some maps that you can see in the report that identify which communities are most underserved, if you will, because those need to be the target areas. From that, we designed a backbone route that would be proximate to those areas and be a logical fiber backbone crossing all 4 counties. And you'll see that proposed backbone in the report as well. One thing I want to talk about right up front is last mile and middle mile. You hear those 2 labels all the time when you're discussing broadband infrastructure. So that backbone route would be what's called middle mile. So if we use kind of a road example, that would be kind of the loop freeway around an urban area, if you will. It's a fiber ring and it carries a large degree of traffic and hauls it across a state or counties, what have you. Then the streets, the surface streets off of that would be last mile. So that's the fiber facilities that's running down every street, passing every home and business. And so that's kind of the endpoint, if you will, where users get connected onto the greater internet network. So that ring that we designed was considered middle mile. Okay. Then what we did, next step in the project was to meet with potential partners. And there's really 2 flavors of partners here that can be involved. One would be infrastructure partners. So that would be someone who has infrastructure today, and there could be potential for swapping or sharing of assets, dark fiber strands, what have you, but an ability to cooperate and be more efficient. The second category of partnership is service providers. So these would be Wave Broadband or other entities that provide service today. And they play a key role relative to grant dollars that I'll go through in a minute. So we met with all those players and got it.
Lost you. Yeah, we've lost the signal there, looks like.
Thus demonstrating the need for more adequate broadband.
Case in point. Well, do we have,
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Commissioner, if Neil, would you be able to jump in until Dave is back?
Am I back now?
Oh,
sounds like Dave's back. We can hear
Okay.
you.
Yeah, something glitched there. Okay, there, my video's back. Sorry about that. So, the grant dollars, and I'll talk about them in a minute here, they really require two things. They require some last mile component, but again, it includes middle mile as well. And then there needs to be a committed service provider that is going to provide the services to the end user. And this is something we saw 12 years ago in 2020 with the ARRA funds. And that's going to be around as well. So with that, let's describe the grant programs. There are two. One is called ARPA, and the other is BEAD. The BEAD program comes directly out of the Infrastructure Act that was signed in November. ARPA was the earlier program. They both have funds that are available to build fiber infrastructure. And as I said, it can be last mile or middle mile. What's interesting about the BEAD program is that's where all the money is really. It's $42 billion for fiber infrastructure. And it's going to be allocated at the state level. So every state currently is in process of creating a 5-year long-term broadband plan that will be submitted around the middle of the year to the feds. And an organization called the NTIA will be administering that program and working with the states. And they will essentially approve the plan. Once each state has its plan approved, they will be able to accept applications for those BEAD grant dollars. And they will be the entity that will be deciding who is eligible and who receives funding. But the priority will remain these underserved areas. It's interesting with the ARPA program, there was a relaxation of the specific requirements to define what underserved means. So that's good news. There'll be more flexibility there. But there's still this desire to prioritize those communities that are underserved and lack, high capacity broadband. So that's something that's pretty important in terms of what we're seeing. So Neil or Ariane, anything else regarding the grant funding? And that's a really high level summary. We do think timing wise that these dollars will start flowing towards the end of the year. So this is a program that's going to take a while to kick off, but that's kind of a high level summary of the grant programs.
Thank you, Dave. I see Commissioner Thompson has a question.
I do, because I'm always interested in who's got the money and how do we bring it home to Clatsop County to get the work done. When I look at the legislation that's in the Oregon legislature now to redefine the Oregon Broadband Office, I get concerned. I spoke Monday with a PUC commissioner who said now that group is becoming more operational and less deliberative. In my mind, it needs to be both deliberative and operational if we're going to be able to advocate effectively for rural broadband consumers. This is tangential and related to what we're talking about, because when we're looking at a state plan, too often what happens is the money continues to go into areas that are already served and we miss out. That's my subjective impression of it. So when you're looking at all of this information that you're giving us, are you taking this shifting landscape into account to help us compete more effectively to bring those dollars home to Clatsop County for our services here, both middle mile and last mile.
Yeah, that's our goal. So our goal would be to pursue a strategy that's going to basically make you most eligible to receive these funds. But you bring up a very good point. I mean, one of the things in my notes to mention is there is going to be some lobbying at these state broadband offices by the incumbents. That's already starting to happen. They're going to challenge overbuilding and push back to minimize the extent to which this program could create more competition for them. So that's always in play. But I think the key takeaway and what we'd recommend to you is that now is the time to engage with your state broadband office and begin that dialogue about how they're thinking about the allocating these grant dollars, what the priority will look like, and then advocating for areas in your county. So yeah, I think that part is critical. I think the other challenge here is finding a service provider partner, and now is the time to begin that task as well.
Dave, if I could jump in real quick. Commissioner Thompson, you may already know this, but a rules advisory committee has formed to advise the state broadband office on how to allocate the funding coming to Oregon, and they're accepting public comment for that rules committee through May. And so Colpac's been working on putting together a letter, which I'm happy to share with you and with the board if that would be of interest.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Thank you, Ariane. I think Commissioner Webb, you have a question?
I do. We have begun to receive, I mean, the commissioners have begun to receive interest from some of the existing providers in wanting to meet with us. I'm not sure, are you going to be able to help us out on how to have these conversations in a way that is both informative to us and not terribly biased? I just kind of would love to, hopefully maybe through Colpac that could happen. I just feel, especially after reading the details of this report, I feel so unable to be able to talk about this issue in a really very complex manner. And since infrastructure is a huge priority for us in this county, as with most rural counties, I wonder if there is something that, I guess I was looking in this report for a little bit more of kind of recommendations. What do you guys think, is the right way to go? And so there's that. My other issue is that I'm still a little confused when you describe the two partners. I'm not sure I'm clear about who the partners are, especially in a place like this where we have such extensive area where there's nothing. So, other than Spectrum, our usual suspects, who is that second partner?
It can be a number of partners. So the two types I described were infrastructure and then service provider.
And I'm not sure I understand that distinction. I guess maybe.
Okay. Sure. So service provider would be a partner that is going to then begin providing service in the newly built out area. So a grant application could look like, we are going to take this community of 3,000 homes and we're going to build fiber infrastructure. You need an internet service provider like Wave Broadband or Comcast or whoever to provide service and commit to that in the grant application. So that would be that service provider partner. Then the infrastructure partner would be one who, more in the background, is just somehow sharing fiber infrastructure assets and access. And so That one's not a requirement for grant funding, but we did look at it because, especially given the scale of this project and how many miles of fiber we're talking about for that middle mile backbone, it would be a good idea to try to be efficient and use capacity where it exists today. That's all. But the really important one is the service provider partner. So Ariane, anything else you want to add to answer that?
Well, maybe I'll just step back a bit, and I may have already communicated this to the board, but one of the reasons we focused on the backbone middle mile portion for the region is to ensure that all these areas that Dave is referring to that don't have service, and even the ones that do that have inadequate service, are well served. And from what we've been able to tell, that whoever owns that backbone really controls where service goes. And so I have decided that I think it's really important that all 4 of the counties in our region own some of this backbone. And it might be that you have a partner, as Dave is referring to, an infrastructure partner that you work with that maybe already owns fiber and the county is able to purchase a few strands, or maybe you work with a partner that builds it where we don't have, and the county owns some portion of the strands. But in order to make sure that our, communities that are harder to serve are served now and in the future, some leverage point to use to attract internet service providers or grant funding, it will be important for us to control some of that backbone. And so that's one of the reasons we've focused on it. And I'll just talk a little bit about what's happening in the other 3 counties. So in Tillamook County, Tillamook Lightwave is the main middle mile provider in Tillamook County. And there we are actually working on a USDA Reconnect grant application, because Tillamook County happens to be along Highway 6. It happens to be the only area in our region that's eligible for a 100% grant funding. And so we're working on Highway 6 fiber backbone right now. In Columbia County, the county knows that they want to own middle mile fiber. And so we're working with Dave and Neil to negotiate some agreements with infrastructure owners or ISPs for Columbia County to either buy or construct fiber along major routes. So along Highway 30 or Cornelius Pass. And then we're also looking Highway 47. We're wanting to make sure that there's some fiber ownership there as well. And then in Washington County, we're looking at doing a last mile build out in order to leverage the need for middle mile. So for example, we're looking at either North Plains or Cornelius. There just happens to be a fiber backbone right up to the edge of those communities. And it's a good opportunity for us to connect to that backbone, build out to the last mile community, and then continue the build on that middle mile fiber. And so every county is turning out to be different. And it really, at this point for Clatsop County, comes down to what makes sense here. And that's partly why we wanted to present some of this information. All right, Dave, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so to finish answering, yes, we'd be happy to be involved as you have these discussions with these service providers. I think it's good news that they are approaching you. And yes, we'd love to be involved with that and kind of define the opportunity, because ultimately, as I mentioned, for the grant dollar program, at least to access that, you're going to need that partner identified. So the recommendation, yeah, the report as it stands right now kind of does fall short of it, but I think based on what we're seeing, and of course this will be subject to whatever develops with your state broadband office over the next coming, 5 months or so, is that you probably want to identify underserved areas. So we've done that part already. You want to locate an ISP partner, I believe. We have yet to identify one that says, yes, we're ready to go. So that's something we're still working on, but we don't have that piece of the puzzle solved yet, if you will. Then you want to begin developing documentation, because all of these applications will require some methodology of describing why more investment is necessary. And that can be a number of different things, but that's something that can start being developed now. And then, as you mentioned earlier, start advocating your broadband office, just to make sure that your goals and the criteria which they are starting to formulate are going to work for you, and that they've got your full input. And then submit a proposal. That's probably looking around third quarter of this year. So that's the rough timing of how we see this. Is going to be a little bit of a slow start to this program. But I think that's, from what we're seeing, probably the best pathway to maximize your chance of getting grant dollars.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I see Commissioner Bangs has a question.
More along the lines of a comment. So I'm looking at these, the Colpack broadband study and the RDOF data. And what I'm seeing is what I feel is probably, so our providers, I live in the Napa area, and our providers tell us what we should be receiving. And that's the 25 megabyte download speed. What we actually receive on the receiving end is less than 10. And so I feel like if we're going off of this data, I don't feel like that's an accurate presentation of what is actually going on the receiving end at the actual household. And I say that, and I'm not going to call providers out on a public meeting, and because it's been a difficult situation in my region. And what I also see is an area that has zero internet service and is allowed zero hookups anymore is actually stated as it's being served. Like Brown's Meat is not being served. And so I don't understand why on these maps it's not showing that Brown's Meat is not being served. And is it just because the population isn't high enough? Or so as we continue these conversations forward, I just don't feel like this is an accurate representation of what is actually going on in our county, because I can guarantee Jewel and areas of Jewel don't have that download speed either. Yeah. And so I'm not sure how we can go forward. Like, anyhow, yes.
Yeah, we can still go forward. Your point's completely valid. It's been known for years that the FCC data, and this is data generated off what's known as Form 477. It's self-reported by the incumbents, and it's known to not be accurate. So part of the funding that took place last year is doing a remapping exercise across the country to get to more accuracy in the mapping. But having said that, the ARPA final order from the Department of Treasury, and we expect this to be carried over into BEAD as well, is allowing deviation from the maps. In other words, as an applicant for grant money, you can provide your own separate documentation to describe what is really happening and what's available. And that can involve survey work. So I was just last week on an initial call with the Colorado State Broadband Office, and they made clear that you can use survey work and data in lieu of map data. And that does directly correspond to the rules with ARPA. So that's good news there, is we're not stuck with that. I will even say that, if you're at 25 meg, you're already looking great. So that part, I would not be worried about the areas you're talking about. The final thing I'll add is there is also expected to be a truth in advertising component in BEAD like there is with ARPA. And I also did hear that in Colorado as well for BEAD. So in other words, if you can provide data to show that what's being advertised by an incumbent provider is not actually being delivered, that will be taken into consideration in approving grant dollars.
Okay, because I know our school districts did very deep surveys regarding internet accessibility for their students, and so I'm sure that we can use that data. And yeah, I would say we aren't sitting pretty, because though they're telling us what we should be receiving, we're not receiving it. And then along that lines, we do have a very strong fiber backbone going down Highway 30. The thing is we're not allowed to hook up to it in my community, because we've tried for a number of years. And so it's there, it's present, but we're not allowed to use it. And so I'm hoping with these conversations that we can push that needle so that it creates accessibility for those communities along Highway 30.
I think Commissioner Toyoka and then Commissioner Thompson.
It's just a question, considering our rural areas, and there's other counties, in the state have the same rural issues. Could Clatsop County emphasize satellite in our broadband mix, to serve more of our areas? Because right now the discussions and all these, you have a small blurb on the end, but in the main body, it's all talking about, the infrastructure for fiber and, physical infrastructure. What about how can we emphasize satellite in our mix? Because I'm sure there's areas in Clatsop County that will never see a fiber or a cable.
Yeah, it's a good question. Both grant programs emphasize and limit to terrestrial wireline infrastructure. So, satellite or low Earth orbit is out. Unfortunately, yeah, you can still pursue that, but you're not going to get grant funding for that with these two particular programs. Elon Musk was able to get, supposedly some grant money. I don't think it's fully approved yet for Starlink, but that's a completely separate program, and he may not maintain eligibility for that program as well.
To Commissioner Bang's point on that same issue is like, we're on a fiber line, we measure our, bandwidth and our throughput. And like Commissioner Bang said, what is purchased and advertised is never what's received. And, we have officially monitor it. And I think the problem is that, under these rural underserved areas, we just don't have the population base for commercial carriers. So, they charge us exorbitant rates, for our bandwidth and throughput in Warrenton, Oregon. It is about 4.5 times as much than our more metro location in McMinnville, where there's 4 competitors vying for our business. And when you measure the bandwidth and throughput there, it's as advertised, because I think they have to compete. And as we expand our broadband, if we only have one major player in our rural area, I think the people of this county might, encounter that same thing, that yes, they might have coverage, but then it'll be, a lower bandwidth, lower throughput, and exorbitant pricing. So when we go through navigate this, we have to be sensitive to, affordability of it, as well as, not letting a monopoly occur that just they can drive any price they wish. Yes, here's your fiber, we'll support that with grants, but now to maintain that service, it's very prohibitive.
Yeah, it's just a quick reaction. You're mentioning affordability, which is another good point. There is a separate program that's included in the funding called the Affordable Connectivity Program. And that does provide an ongoing subsidy that's pretty significant. It's $30 per month per end user. And so a service provider that does receive grant funds is required to implement a program of that nature. And so that's good news there. But as you're pointing out, affordability is also a component. We expect it to be part of the state broadband office criteria for awarding this grant money. And again, last week on that call with Colorado, they mentioned affordability as well. So there are a number of dimensions to approach this in terms of demonstrating the necessity of the investment. And, all of them need to be on the table, including affordability.
All right, there, Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, sir. So the issue in Warrenton is a little different than down here. There is the capacity of the system. I mean, everything that everybody else said. And when we have surges of population, we have folks with urban appetites for broadband, and they take up the capacity. So the reliability of the system is compromised down here. I was trying to make phone calls yesterday. Half the time they didn't work, and I had to make 7 or 8 attempts at doing that, because what I have is electricity and a Wi-Fi hotspot. So these complex systems, we have an unregulated public utility. So all of the issues that you described, everything that everybody said, and surges of demand, unreliable systems, all of that. Okay, so we'll get the data. My question to our county manager is, we have an opportunity here. We have very complex, adaptive, interactive systems of regulation and funding. And county manager, how do we integrate staff efforts, commissioner efforts, all of the different places we need to be, the broadband office with their administrative, I mean, how do we arrange and coordinate the work?
Well, Commissioner Thompson, Chair Quayle, I think that's a root question that every rural county has to navigate when it comes down to these kinds of issues. And I think we'll have to talk about that as part of the strategic plan discussion next week, because obviously in the case of Clatsop County, and I don't think we're unique, is that this isn't in our service realm. And so this is something that is, kind of interplanetary in some regards. And so we're going to have to figure out what it means, and then how the county supports that, and then how, to your point, do we coordinate between all the different levels of government that are interfacing on this issue. And so I think my answer right now is that's yet to be determined, and that'll take much conversation and figure out resource alignment as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, County Manager. Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Banks?
Just while I have everyone sitting here, in regards, so my community did a survey about 3 years ago and sent it off to Betsy Johnson in hopes of trying to shove this circle through a square. And so are we able to use information that we gathered, so far in the past? I know 3 years is short, but it's also long. So I was just curious, because I'll start trying to retrieve that data.
Yeah, I don't think we know that specifically, but I would be optimistic. And then I think that that's a question to get to your state broadband office as they think about it. And I'll just say in general, I think that a lot of really good comments about the range of issues that you all are facing relative to this topic, that should get back to your state broadband office through that public comment process that Ariane was talking about. That's going to be really important feedback for them, because they're going to weigh that feedback in terms of deciding what that evaluation matrix looks like to score these different applications and what's important.
And by chance, will we have a timeline of how this, what is the timeline of us getting the information to the broadband office, I guess, before, what timeline are we looking at?
Commissioner Banks, that public comment needs to be submitted by May. Chair Quayle, I have one.
Yes, go ahead. I know that you had probably a follow-up to Commissioner.
Yeah, County Manager, or Commissioners, if there's any more information needed in order for you to have, a comprehensive conversation about the options related to broadband, COPAC's happy to pull together that information so that you have it for your strategic meetings. You can just let me know what you might need, or what questions remain unanswered.
Thank you, Ariane. I see that Commissioner Webb has a question.
Yes, while we still have all these smart guys in the room, I'm a little bit of a student of the Rural Electrification Act during the 1930s. And one of the issues there that I remember was very critical was geography. And we're in a situation in Clatsop County where our entire northern border and our entire western border is water. And so access into the county we only have two directions, east and south, for it to come to us. And I remember that in the rural
That was. Got somebody that's.
Speaking of internet issues, but I just wonder if the consultants are aware if there are any subtleties in this initiative that will honor the geographic issues related to the implementation of a system.
Neil, do you have any thoughts on that? Can you hear Neil?
Can you hear you, Neil?
No, still can't hear you. Okay. Yeah, so Commissioner, I don't, that's more Neil's area than mine. I'm not aware of anything specific on the geography. The geography does come into play in terms of the cost to make the investment. And we expect that we don't know this because it's, again, going to be up to whatever criteria the State Broadband Office comes up with. But we do expect there'll be a need to demonstrate financial self-sufficiency of whatever investment is made over time. So in other words, that once that initial capital investment is made, there's not a need for ongoing investment or subsidization, that there'll be revenue streams that will cover the operating expenses associated with maintaining that infrastructure. So there's that piece, but other than that, I'm not aware of any specific geographic component, like addressing kind of the challenges that you're talking about. We did hear when we talked to the 10 entities that there is new investment happening with submarine cables, landing on the coast. So that continues to come in. But yes, it's a very good point that, geographically, especially in the more rural areas, the geography can really affect the cost of making this investment.
I think Commissioner Webb, did you have a follow-up on that, or are you good? Okay.
Just a little bit. Actually, I was going to ask about the cable issue because that's something that we have to pay close attention to because of the issues of cable landings on our vast water borders. But I also wondered if are there any, I don't know what the right word is. Are there ratios of population or user population to geographic areas? Can an expert take a look at Brownsmead, for instance, and say, well, there are X number of users there, or potential users, and the land area is Y, and therefore it will or will not work, or is there do you see what I mean? Kind of a ratio of land to users that can give us some idea of areas that maybe we may never be able to serve.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, yes, we like to go much more detailed, and we do things like sample designs to get a more refined estimate there, because there's always, variabilities. It's not just density. It can be also the type of construction, whether it's aerial or underground. Underground can be 10 times more expensive per foot or per mile compared to aerial. And then it involves, local construction costs, and right now we're seeing an increase, I think, given supply chain issues, et cetera. So, I don't think there's an easy metric like that to get an answer on whether it's financially viable. I think you have to go into more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. Well, to echo Commissioner Bang's point, I was in a 7.5-hour meeting last Friday with BOEM about offshore generation of electricity with wind power. I had a conversation subsequent to that with the PUC commissioner. Even though this broadband is an unregulated public utility, the issue remains the same. if we have no stubs, which is the phrase that I've heard used to indicate local access, it doesn't matter what goes through Clatsop County, whether it's electricity or broadband. So the conversation with the PUC commissioner was to the nature of our having access to the utility that's flowing through our geography, both broadband and electricity. We need to have access. Otherwise, we're the equivalent of flyover country, and we remain underserved, regardless of what the cost benefit ratios are and any other metrics that we have. They have to see it in the definition of their work to provide us with access. Otherwise, we are not likely to get it because it increases the cost, the operating costs of these public utilities, broadband and electricity. So that's where we need to have our intervention, is in the definition that all of the providers are held accountable to. So I think that's a particularly salient point when we provide input to the rules to the Oregon Broadband Office and the Oregon Public Utility Commission, is that local access, is the analysis of the benefits, not just of the costs of providing services. Benefit analysis.
Yeah, that's a good point. That came up in some of the discussions that we had with some of the service providers, in that some of them, the smaller ones typically, are in some cases are frustrated with a lack of access to the backbone middle mile network that's there today. So when those are designed and built, in a lot of cases, those are built as what's called expressway. So they express through, there's no off ramps. So, if you're, it's going along the freeway, it's right next to community, but there's no off ramp for that community to tap into that backbone, that high capacity. So again, that would be a good point to make to the state broadband office. And then with any plan that's developed that involves middle mile, and we expect it will, that there will be off ramps designs to improve local access for a range of service providers, and not only give them access to more backbone capacity, but encourage competition.
Thank you, Dave. Commissioner Bangs?
So just in regards to those off ramps, all of our businesses in our community in Napa have an off ramp off of that main backbone. And I won't talk about servers or providers. Our school district included, they have an off ramp. And I think the biggest frustration for the folks living around there is you could be right next door to the school district and still not be able to tap into the off ramp. And it's just because we're not allowed to. And so it's it's a very large frustration to have something be 500 feet away from you, but you can't access it because the company will not allow you to. And so that's I think the biggest kicker that I'm trying to drive in here is that it's there. We just have to figure out a way to access it and allow our constituents and our families to do so.
Good point. Thank you, Commissioner Bangs. Any other comments, questions? Well, this has been a good discussion. Obviously, it impacts a number of our districts, and I'm glad that we're advancing on this. So thanks to all the work. Thanks for the presentation from the consultants. And Ariane, thank you so much for being here. And I think we'll be seeing everybody again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next item, which is the comprehensive plan update, Goaltend housing. And we have Gail Henriksen, our community development director, joining us. I'll turn it over to Gail.
Thank you, commissioners. Good morning. We last talked about Goaltend on December 1st of last year, and during your discussions, you had quite a few items that you wanted to see included in the next draft of Goaltend for our comprehensive plan. And I'm just going to run through these briefly. They are outlined in my agenda summary, but to touch on the items that I heard expressed and to kind of point out where they are in the comp plan. So these are are not in any order of importance, just simply how they were discussed at the meeting. And the first had to do with the regional housing needs analysis that was put out by the state. And this is something that came out of House Bill 2003 that was adopted back in 2019. And what that requirement was that the state, primarily the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department, was tasked with developing a methodology to conduct a regional housing needs analysis for the entire state over the next 20 years. And that report was issued in March of last year. And for the North Coast, which includes Clatsop, Columbia, Tillamook, and Lincoln counties, they identified a total of just over 17,000 housing units that we were in deficit of over the next 20 years. Their next step was to break that 17,000 units and distribute them up over the various cities in the region. But it should be noted that they did not assign housing units or need to the unincorporated areas. And that's in keeping again with Goal 14 and Goal 11, which talks about Goal 14 urbanization and how we direct and funnel our more intense growth into the incorporated areas where they have services that are already provided or can easily be provided. And we're talking about things like sewer and water and apparently broadband as well, as we've just witnessed over the past half hour of your discussion this morning. So to further break it down, looking specifically at Clatsop County and our 5 cities, there were just over 3,000 housing units that the state identified would be needed over the next 20 years. And that includes units needed to address population growth, but also to catch up with any deficits that we are currently experiencing. And so the next step in that process is going to occur by the end of this year, and that is for the Department of Land Conservation and Development to develop a legislative proposal that would incorporate this requirement to conduct a regional housing needs analysis into any future and future state and local planning processes. And so that's going to move forward and has to be completed by the end of the year this year. So at this point, the county is kind of in a holding pattern. There are some requirements that cities with a population over 10,000 have to address, and right now that's only Astoria, and they are moving forward with their mandatory housing needs analysis. And then following that, they have to put together what's called a housing production strategy. And so they'll be looking for funding and moving forward with that once their needs analysis is completed, and that is due sometime in 2024. So I wanted to go through that section because I know that Commissioner West specifically had brought this process up, and so I wanted to make sure that the other board members were aware of it and what the steps were and what the county's role in it is, even though our role is right now pretty minimal. So any questions about the regional housing needs analysis or comments about that?
Apologies, Commissioner.
Go ahead.
I don't know, was that me? Because you cut out. Okay, well, I was just
sorry.
wanting to make, I was just wanting to make note that I was looking at the 2019 housing unit capacity by jurisdiction, and it seems to be an adequate supply of buildable land. So I guess my conundrum is what is our limiting factors? And I'm sure that this is a conversation for another time, but I'm just looking at it and I feel like that should be something that we discuss, and probably not today, but at a later date.
See Commissioner Thompson, then Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I looked at the population figures, the actual population of our cities seems to exceed, for the most part, the numbers used by Portland State. So I wondered how we could rectify those differing sets of data.
That's a very good question, Commissioner Thompson. Moving forward, the American Community Survey between now and 2030 will do some population estimates and updates. But since Portland State is our official source of the information, there is a discrepancy, and I'm not sure exactly how we're going to reconcile that moving forward, because obviously their forecasts undercounted and projected what was anticipated to occur.
So my concern is that if we start off with the wrong data and we keep going down that path, it's not a happy outcome. So I'm looking forward to that rectification. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Webb?
Yeah, to answer Commissioner Thompson's question, I think that was one of the reasons that the legislature, I think that was one of the things that concerned a lot of us in the 2019 housing study, is that we knew we were working with 9-year-old data that had only been corrected by the ACS. And we know that in Oregon, as in the rest of rural US, the ACS does tend to have a significant percentage of undercount, especially in rural areas. Which are also defined, remember, of cities, small cities. So it includes it includes definitely all 5 of our cities in Clatsop County. And I think that was one of the reasons that the state legislature went with a mandate for regional housing analysis. I have spoken at length with Echo Northwest, who are the folks who actually performed sort of designed this system for OHCS to follow. And it's really an emerging science. It really is. So I think it does behoove us to be very attendant on those numbers. But I think it definitely speaks to the issue that somehow there wasn't a lot of attention paid to urbanization issues around growing cities. That makes me kind of say it, especially in Clatsop County, but it certainly does speak to the need for the coordination among cities and between the cities and the county. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions before we move on? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Gail.
Okay, and then moving on, the rest of these are fairly straightforward, but your board had a lot of conversation about the need to work and coordinate efforts with the incorporated cities and the county regarding housing provision. And so I wanted to point out that there is language in policies C, D, and E under the governmental cooperation and coordination section of Goaltend, which is located on page 62 of your board packet today. There was a discussion from Commissioner Toyoka that when we do a housing needs inventory, that it should also take a look at the need for affordable housing units versus market rate housing units. And so we did add a specific policy J under residential development on page 62. And then I think there's also some overlap with policy A, which is on page 63 of the housing rehabilitation policies as well. Your board did ask staff to incorporate the relevant strategies from that 2019 Housing Strategies report into the document, and so we've included those on page 62 and 63. And then Commissioner Bangs had asked for some clarification about how the county could facilitate alteration or replacement of manufactured homes. And so we did some adjustment to that language, which is policy F under the housing strategies report policies. And basically the easiest way for the county to facilitate that is to review our permitting processes and to streamline them as much as possible when it comes to issuing permits for a replacement of a manufactured home. And that's probably the strongest, easiest most fiscally expedient way that we can facilitate. And so we did put that language in there. And I see Commissioner Thompson has her hand up.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Well, I raised the issue of the community action team, and the community action team does operate low-income housing in Cannon Beach, and I didn't see that mentioned. Community action team also on page 62 does work on maintenance housing issues in the Tri-County area, Columbia, Clatsop, and Tillamook. And so I'm looking there on page 62 and on the bottom of page 63, because CAT's involved in all of these programmatic areas in the Tri-County area. So I don't know how to get them on our radar screen, but I think it's essential. I also, that's a point, separate issue. If we looked at higher density mixed use development, page 62 and page 63, in rural communities that are served by water and sewer districts, does that refer to Arch Cape and Falcon Cove Beach? Because Arch Cape has both a water and a sewer district, and Falcon Cove Beach does have a water district. So the issue that you've elevated so broadly and for 3 years, compounded by another 2 years, the issues of urbanization, because that's one way to look at the revision of the comp plan and of the STR issue, is we're looking at the impacts of increasing urbanization. Even though it's intermittent, it isn't always. How do we cope with it? How do we adjust to it? How do neighbors get used to the idea that we do have an increased population, that there are different pressures, and what's the appropriate legal underpinning, whose jurisdiction, whose responsibility? We keep wrestling with this. I think it's a pretty complicated issue. And I apologize for being the one who brings up the gnarly issue, but it's my neighborhood, so it's in my face quite literally every day. Second point, that's the end of that. Urbanization, how do we deal with it? And the third thing, LCDC is undergoing some revisions, and Commissioner Lincoln County Chair, Commissioner Katie Jacobson, is the coastal representative to that. I'm trying to look at how AOC coordinates through our district and across the state to look at possible revisions, because the only reason to bring people together to talk is to actually revise the LCDC operating rules. This is all very complicated, and as you say, Director Henriksen, we're doing this as we go. It's like COVID that Health Director Lalich described. We don't have the luxury of just considering it. We're doing it as we go. That's how it occurs to me. So that's my 3 comments on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Bang?
I just wanted to see if we could make note of our partnership with AOC in the water quality and quantity section of our plan. I know that AOC is pushing and I just figure that should probably be slid in here somehow, some way, what we're doing in partnership with them.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. Do we have any other comments, questions? I agree with you. Okay. Gail?
Okay. Moving on from there, we added policies to page 64 regarding housing for unsheltered persons. And then Commissioner Thompson had also discussed cross-laminated timber and its role in housing. And we did put a very small section in there that addresses that on page 58, and also pointed out that it's probably more fully addressed and more applicable in goal 9, which is economic development. So it'll be covered in both of those goals in the comprehensive plan. And I saw Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. I wanted to say one more thing. In terms of the failing septic systems, Casey Miller from the Community Action Team raised that issue in our board meeting on Monday. And Kat is trying to work regionally to deal with the interaction between failing septic systems and groundwater quality issues. So that's an additional point to that. And I would, I appreciate your accommodating my preference. The mass timber technology is distinct from mass plywood panels. Mass timber technology is more suitable for multifamily dwellings. Mass plywood panels can be made into modular housing that is suitable for both single family and more than single family. I talked Monday with Margaret Van Vliet, who's writing a $100 million grant for the Port of Portland to establish a mass plywood panel manufacturing facility on Terminal 2 at the Port of Portland. My point to her was that needs to be disseminated all through rural Oregon. Those manufacturing jobs, that economic tax base, that has to be disseminated. So I agree with your point. I think we agree on a lot of stuff. It's just finding the right language to express our agreement. Sometimes it gets challenging. If we don't disseminate the economic opportunity all through Oregon, rural Oregon, we perpetuate the wealth gap and the divide between urban and rural. So it can't just stay in Portland. It has to come out to our community. We're close. When we look at Hayek Marine and they're doing their development there and they're looking at the redevelopment of the rail line, I mean, the opportunities are going to be here to manufacture because we have the raw materials. The interaction between housing and jobs is what I'm looking to point to. And I don't want to muck up your plan here, but there is a nexus between the economic opportunity of a manufacturing job that has adequate and stable income related to value added to a natural resource that's part of our community tax base and our geography. That's what I keep asking for, advocating for. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Next, do we have any other comments, questions? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Gail.
Okay, so that really covered the issues that came up at your December 1st meeting. I've taken notes on items that came up from today. And so we have to keep in mind that Goaltend and all of our comprehensive plan are really nothing but a snapshot in time. And just to emphasize that fact, since the time I submitted this agenda item a couple weeks ago until today's meeting, some things that have occurred is that the state has pledged $400 million to address state housing needs. Yesterday, I had updated information about the use of cooperative housing to broaden housing ownership opportunities in the state. And Cannon Beach is trying to start a regional housing discussion. And I have forwarded an email to the county manager for your board to look at. We want to have a time to sit down with possibly some staff and possibly a board representative to meet with Cannon Beach and their side of things to begin discussions on a regional housing discussion. So, I mean, we can keep, there's always so much happening that if we keep trying to update it to the most extent possible, we'll never finish Goaltend. But I will incorporate what we've discussed today or what you've discussed. And then unless the board would like me to come back one more time with a third draft of Goaltend, otherwise we plan on taking this updated draft with your comments from today to the Planning Commission on April 12th. And so I'll look for your direction on how you would like staff to proceed. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Gail. Is everybody fine with that? Okay. Sounds like a thumbs up from everybody, or looks like a thumbs up. How's that? Great. Thank you, Gail, for all your work. Any other items on the agenda? I think that is everything. Do we have anything for the good of the order? Okay, if not, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks for everybody. We'll see you.